It is late afternoon, March 3, 1913, when President-elect Woodrow Wilson arrives at Union Station in Washington, D.C. Even though Wilson's inauguration is the next day, the streets are empty. Wilson asks where everyone is. Over on the avenue, watching the suffrage parade, he is told. With floats, music, and banners, more than 5,000 suffragists from across the nation are marching. As the parade moves down Pennsylvania Avenue, hostile onlookers break through police lines. They taunt and jostle the marchers. Angry protesters gather in front of the reviewing stand, where the First Lady, Nellie Taft, and other dignitaries are seated. Fearing a riot, the Secretary of War calls in the cavalry from nearby Fort Myer. Ironically, the protest backfired. The ill treatment of the marchers generated publicity, sympathy, and momentum for the cause of women's suffrage. By the time Woodrow Wilson left office 8 years later, a suffrage march was no longer needed. The 19th Amendment had become part of the Constitution. But as suffragist Carrie Chapman Catt noted, to get the word male, in effect, out of the Constitution cost the women of the country 52 years of pauseless campaign.
Women's suffrage is a long story of hard work and heartache, crowned by victory.
In fact, the prejudices the campaign had to overcome can be traced all the way back to the nation's founding. In June of 1776, John Adams, while helping to write the Declaration of Independence, received a letter from his wife Abigail.
I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation.
But the authors of the Declaration of Independence and the framers of the Constitution ignored her plea. The right to vote was reserved for white male property holders. 3/4 of a century later, at the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848, activists like Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton drafted a Declaration of Sentiments, adapting the words of the Declaration of Independence to proclaim that all men and women are created equal. It was approved along with 12 resolutions demanding equal rights for women, including the sacred right to vote. Supporters of women's rights also campaigned for the abolition of slavery, in the belief that securing rights for African Americans would advance their cause. They were bitterly disappointed, however, when the Reconstruction Amendments protecting the rights of former slaves had failed to include women. And so in 1869, the campaign to win the right to vote for women formally began. In 1871, suffragists petitioned Congress to extend the vote to women. And in 1878, Susan B. Anthony introduced what would later become the 19th Amendment. By the end of the 19th century, some Western states had given all of their citizens, men and women, the right to vote. But their example had not been followed in the East or South. In the years before World War I, the campaign intensified as suffragists used parades, mass meetings, lectures, and leaflets to spread the word. When Americans went to war in 1917 to make the world safe for democracy, the fact that nearly half of U.S. citizens were denied the vote could no longer be ignored. President Wilson was won over, and eventually Congress was as well, approving the amendment and sending it to the states in 1919. 35 states quickly ratified the amendment, but 36 states were needed for its adoption. On August 18, 1920, a young Tennessee legislator named Harry Byrne, who had decided to vote against the amendment, received a letter from his elderly mother. "Hurrah and vote for suffrage," she wrote. When the final tally was taken, Byrne had changed his mind. By a single vote, Tennessee had become the 36th state to ratify. The speedy ratification of the 19th Amendment made clear the overwhelming will of the people. Yet the struggle for women's suffrage had taken decades of pauseless campaign. It is therefore reasonable to ask how well the amendment process served the country, and especially its women citizens.